Okay, so let's get into this. Why now? Well, currently I feel like I've lived my life in thirds. My first third was when I was living in New York. I was born and raised in Long Island, and then I lived in New York City for 2 years. And I was there from, birth until 27. And then when I was 27, I met Martin, my partner. Ironically or coincidentally, it was today, 34 years ago, on Nantucket. And that trajectory changed my life. And I ended up moving to the DC area to be with Martin. And 12 years passed there. Then we moved to Maine. 10 years passed there. And sadly, Martin passed in 2012 after 20 years together. So that whole middle section of my life was with, my husband Martin. Of course, we couldn't marry because gay marriage was finalized after he had already passed. And now I'm in the third section of my life. I don't want to say the third end, but and that's been a very different part of my life. And each part I have felt like a different person. So in 2013, I decided I didn't want to live in Maine by myself. And I decided to apply to jobs at international schools. I've worked in education. I am an educator. Still am, even though I'm not currently working in education. I will always be an educator. I started applying to international schools. Initially, of course, I wanted to go to Europe because that's what I knew best. But starting out in the education field in international schools, Europe is top tier, and without experience, it was very difficult ceiling to crack. So I started getting offers for Asia, and lo and behold, I got one for Seoul. Didn't know anything about Seoul, South Korea. But I liked the director. I liked the school. They flew me out there to visit, and I made the decision to do it. And this was in 2013. I was 48 years old. Before I left for the trip, I was having a conversation with one of my friends, Jim, who actually had spent many, many years in China with his business. And he told me to be prepared for what he coined, probably somebody else had coined it, but he used it first with me, the Tom Cruise effect. And I didn't know what he meant by that, and I will explain as I get a little bit into the story. But when I arrived to Seoul, it had been a year and a half since Martin had died, so I was still grieving and not dating or even actively seeking anybody to spend the night with. It still felt very fresh, and it felt like I was cheating. So it was a new experience for me, and I'll talk about Martin. I mean, I could dedicate a whole separate podcast to that, you know. But there are other people doing it much better than me, like Anderson Cooper. If you're out there and I'm manifesting this, I would love to be on your podcast about grief. Of course, that's a long ways off, but people say we look alike. Anyway, so when I arrived to Seoul, since a year and a half had passed, it felt like, okay, maybe it was time to get my feet wet, go back out into the dating scheme. But I was 48. And, back in 2013, if you're 48 years old in the United States and you use these social media apps like Scruff and Grindr, I mean, they practically issue you a death certificate. I might as well have been part of the wallpaper on the Grindr profile. And so I wasn't expecting anything at 48. I have no illusions. I consider myself a reasonably attractive guy, but there are way hotter guys out there than me, guys in better shape, guys who are younger. There's always somebody more attractive than you. So I was very surprised when I first opened, one of those apps such as Grindr. And was inundated, I mean, flooded by messages. When in the United States, I'd be lucky if I got one or two. And it really shocked me, you know, and that's back to what I said earlier that my friend had told me about. He said, age won't be a factor for you when you're in Asia. You will suddenly find yourself as popular as Tom Cruise. And, you know, he was right, especially not necessarily in, I mean, of course, in Seoul, yes, but I really noticed it when I went to a conference in Bangkok in September or October of that year, 2013. I landed at the airport, got to the hotel, opened up one of those apps, and I couldn't even keep up with the texts I were getting. One after the other, after the other, after the other. I didn't have time to answer one before 10 more came through. And I was like, holy shit. This has never happened. Even when I was a hot, young 25-year-old guy in a New York City bar. You know, it was really shocking. I mean, that's the only word I can use. And so then that led to the question, why? You know, I'm a New Yorker. I think we were born suspicious. And I'm thinking, okay, what can it be? You know, and there are many, many answers. And this is where I have to sort of be careful because I don't want to criticize. I don't want to offend. And I don't want to paint the whole thing in broad strokes. But I've thought about this a lot. I still think about it 12 years later because it still surprises me. Obviously, I think that the first thing is that I'm different looking. You know, I don't look like everybody else in Asia. And, you know, I understand that because when I went to Seoul, and I think every white guy or any person of color really should experience being in a setting where you're the only person of that color and everybody else around you is different. Most Americans don't ever have that experience of suddenly being so different and having people look at you, in many cases outright staring at you, and getting used to that feeling of being different, being an outsider. And so, you know, the opposite is true. If I'm in a country that's filled with Asian men, you know, I look different because I have white skin. And this is where I don't understand this because I always long to have darker mahogany colored skin as opposed to being pale as shit with, you know, I got freckles all over my arms. I had freckles on my face when I was young. Yet this is what many people desire or want in Asia. And that comes, of course, there's so many reasons for that, but it really comes from you know, social media. It comes from Hollywood. It comes from television, where, you know, Hollywood portrays this image that white is more attractive. I don't believe it, but many, many people do. And, you know, you just got to look at the products they sell in Korea or the way that Vietnamese women cover up at the beach. They don't want to be dark. Meanwhile, I'm like begging to be dark and can try forever, and it doesn't happen. So, yeah, that's part of it, of course. There are other darker sides to why I could be considered, you know, attractive and why guys want to be in touch with me. You know, some of it is that, you know, the perception that I'm an American means that I'm rich, that I'm able to care for others. I'm in education. I've never been rich. You know, anybody who goes into education does not go in there for the money. But of course, comparatively to what people earn in Vietnam or what they earn in Thailand, yeah, I probably was well off. And this is something as a white tourist people have to navigate. It helped that, as I said earlier, I'm a suspicious New Yorker and just questioned everything. But, you see it all the time, especially in Bangkok. And, I'm not, trust me, I'm not being critical. But it's quite obvious that when you go to gay bars or any bar, even a straight bar, particularly a straight bar, you'll see men way older than me in their 70s with women who are 20. And you see that, at gay bars as well. There was a famous bar in Bangkok called Telephone Bar. It's now called Circus, I think. And same thing, older, sometimes overweight, not particularly attractive men, or with guys you couldn't imagine even talking to if you were attractive. And, that's their choice. If they want to do that, that's fine. Good for them. Lucky them. But a part of you always has to wonder what's really going on here. And I always said to myself, I don't want to be one of those guys. I don't. I want people to like me for who I am and not for what I could potentially bring to the situation. So it was quite an adjustment. And it's still something I think about all the time because I've met many Asian men. I have many Asian friends. And you can still see it on the social apps like Grindr. Not as bad as it used to be. I mean, when I first looked at Grindr many, many years ago, I used to see in profiles, no fats, no femmes, no Asians. I mean, that was really bad. And fortunately, I haven't seen that in several years, thank God. But I see it a lot in Asian profiles where they are not interested in other Asian men. Now, I understand everybody has a preference. Obviously, I have a preference. I'm with an Asian man. But if I weren't, I wouldn't be exclusively only looking at Asian men. I find men of all colors attractive. To me, it's just about the connection, not necessarily what race or what skin color or what ethnicity they are. But I find in Asia, especially Vietnam, where we have a home, many Asian men will just absolutely refuse to be with another Vietnamese guy. I always wondered about that, and it makes me wonder why. And, it smacks a little bit of self-loathing, but I don't think that's the case. But I do think it's a result of sort of a type of brainwashing that social media has done and film and television has done, giving the perception that being Caucasian, being Western is better than being Asian. And that is so absurd. But I encounter it a lot. So yeah, it was quite a transformation for me. And I, I made the stupid mistakes that, anybody first exposed to it does. You start conversations when somebody says hi, and quickly those conversations lead into directions you don't want. And, it's improved. Things have gotten better as homosexuality is becoming more accepted in Asia. I mean, Taiwan now has gay marriage. Thailand has gay marriage just recently this year. I'm hoping that Vietnam one day does. I anticipate that other countries will follow suit. It would be nice. But yeah, so it was a whole new world for me. It was a whole new world. And friends of mine who lived in Seoul with me, also white gay men, There were several of them at my school, all experienced the same phenomenon. And we've talked about this a lot. And I bring it up now in this second episode of the channel, to sort of open the discussion with, current viewers, future viewers, especially people of Asian descent, to sort of get some of the answers to questions that I've struggled with over the 12 years. Because it's something that has always bothered me, and kind of mystifies me too, because I don't see myself that way, but others see me that way. And I guess that's a lesson to be learned from this whole experience, is that you have to sometimes view yourself through the lens of others. And that's back to a point I made earlier about experiencing that sense of being completely isolated from what is comfortable. And, going into rooms or restaurants or wedding venues. I've been to a lot of weddings in Asia where you are the only white person in the room. Or you're sitting in the subway in Seoul, and personal space in Seoul in particular, in Korea, is very different than Western personal space. And I can talk about that in another video. But, getting used to somebody just openly staring at you. And sometimes older Korean men, ajishis as they call them, they would actually touch me, pet me, look at my arm and caress the freckles. And, in the United States, that would be like, what the hell? But in Seoul, it was normal. And you learn to accept that. So I wanted to just talk about that first before I really start getting into some of the things I learned as I began to date Asian men, because it sort of frames the whole experience to begin with. So, as always, I'm new at this. I hope 6 months from now I look back on these earlier videos and cringe once I learn how to even edit them better. But continue to just like me, subscribe, comment, especially on this episode, because I really would like the feedback. So thanks so much.